Well, here's the truth. If you're anti-woke, you're pro-bigot. Basically, you know, there's this history, calling people names, I mean, goes all the way back to the founding of the Republic. But this has been a Republican thing since, in a big way, since Richard Nixon declared his war on drugs back in 1968. And you'll recall, or shortly thereafter when he became president, and you'll recall that, you know, the war on drugs, as John Ehrlichman said, you know, he said, you want to know what's really going on. He was Richard Nixon's right-hand man. He said, you want to know what's really going on here is, you know, our main enemies were anti-war hippies and black people, and you can't outlaw either one of them. So what we did was we heavily criminalized marijuana that the hippies were smoking and heroin, which was a problem in the black community at the time, and then used that heavy criminalization to go in and break up their meetings, arrest their leaders, throw them in jail, disrupt their programs. And it worked, by the way. I mean, you know, the Nixon's war on drugs, which continues in red states all across America to this day, has devastated the lives of probably millions of families in America. When I was in high school, one of my three best friends was arrested for possession of marijuana and was sentenced to 2 years in prison for it. And he came out broken. I mean, he was a completely different person when he came out of prison. It was, you know, I haven't seen him since. I mean, you know, we saw him a couple of times after he got out of prison, and it was shocking. So, you know, there's this long history of, you know, Richard Nixon had his war on drugs as his way of demonizing anti-war basically the left and black people. George Herbert Walker Bush. Well, Ronald Reagan, you know, talked about, doesn't it make you upset when that young buck is in front of you in line buying steak with his food stamps and you work hard for your money? Talking about the brats. In fact, four or 5 days before the Kent State massacre, Ronald Reagan said publicly, if it takes a bloodbath, let's get it over with. After he had called the protesters at Kent State and across the country, I mean, there were protests all across the country that year, had called them brats. So this is pretty grim stuff. Then George Herbert Walker Bush, he had Willie Horton, you know, the murderer and rapist of white women. And then George W. Bush, of course, he had, you know, Muslims, and he set up black sites all around the world to torture and kill Muslims, and kind of, you know, lump them all together into one giant. I mean, you know, he would talk about radical Islam, but that's, you know, not what he was doing. We now know that, you know, as many as half of the people who ended up in Guantanamo were completely innocent. They were just, you know, sold out by their neighbors because we were offering $5,000 bounties in a country where the average income was $750 a year. $5,000. If somebody offered you 5 years worth of income or 6 years worth of income to turn in your neighbor for something they didn't do, I'm guessing if you're watching this show, you would have turned it down, but I'm guessing that you also know somebody who would have taken that money, who probably votes for Donald Trump. And then, of course, we got Donald Trump, who came along and started his campaign in 2015, his primary campaign, talking about you know, brown people from south of the border. His principal hating was on Mexican immigrants, or, you know, immigrants from south of the United States. So there's this long history. Well, now what they're doing is they're using the word woke. This is, you know, Ron DeSantis talking about woke, Nikki Haley talking about woke. Pretty much the only person that's not using woke in a big way is Donald Trump, because he just says the racist things out loud. He doesn't need to use code. He doesn't need the dog whistle. And what this reminds me of is how Rush Limbaugh demonized the word liberal so effectively that in 1992, Bill Clinton refused to describe himself as a liberal. In fact, he said, I'm not a liberal, I'm going a third way. And then in 1996, when he ran for re-election, he you know, the headline in the Washington Post, Bill Clinton claims he's not a liberal. It was because Limbaugh had made the word toxic. Well, that's what Republicans are trying to do with woke. Well, although it's not really so much that Republicans are trying to make the word woke toxic. What they're trying to do is use woke as their new dog whistle. as their new way. It's, you know, it's their new N-word. It's their new communism word. It's their new, you know, it's kind of fill all purposes. They use it to trash, you know, queer people. They use it to trash progressives. They use it to trash universities. They use it to trash, you know, whatever they want to trash. And frankly, I think that what we need to do is take a page out of the Rush Limbaugh playbook and throw this right back in their faces. When, you know, when you hear somebody or a Republican politician saying that they're anti-woke, just say, oh, you're anti-woke. That means you're pro-bigot. Or, you know, by attacking people who are woke to our nation's history, what, are you siding with the Nazis and the Klan? Or, I'm woke and I'm proud of it. Or, you know, you must be a hater and you should be ashamed of yourself. Or, hey, it's another Republican proclaiming his bigotry by attacking woke. I think we need to start calling this out for what it is. This is bigotry. It's it's anti-woman, it's anti-black, it's anti-Hispanic, it's it's basically anti-progress in America. And by calling people who are using the word woke as a pejorative,